It's reckoned that Hannibal lost as many men and animals over the precipices as had been killed fighting the Gallic tribes. Indeed, when you look at the losses Hannibal's army sustained, it really makes things look a little different to the idealized and triumphal crossing of the Alps.
By modern-day standards, Hannibal's crossing of the Alps was an unmitigated disaster. Hannibal suffered 50% casualties, a figure that today, politically and militarily, would be unacceptable in any war short of a nuclear war.
Hannibal entered the foothills of the Alps with an army of some 46,000 men. A combination of the two ambushes by the Gallic tribes, the appalling weather, and the treacherous descent, all took their toll on his men. By the time he emerged on the other side, in Italy, he'd lost half his army, a staggering 20,000 men.
When we look at what Hannibal accomplished, the crossing of the Alps, it makes us realize how close he came not to victory, but to defeat. For had Hannibal and his men perished of starvation and of exposure on the slopes of these Alps, as they well could have, Hannibal would have disappeared from the pages of history and would have been relegated to nothing more than an insignificant footnote.
To lose half his army before even reaching Roman soil could have spelled the end of Hannibal's campaign. But it didn't. What allowed him to continue boils down to one critical factor. Hannibal commanded what was, in essence, a mercenary army.
Hannibal's army is the best in the world at that time. It's very experienced. It consists of professional soldiers. Fighting is what they do.
He built his army around a core of trusted crack troops. It was a veritable multinational melting pot of men drawn from Carthage's many subject territories.
It's also a well-balanced army. It consists of lots of different nations, all speaking different languages, but each of them bring particular techniques of fighting that together are far more formidable than an army that's everyone fights in exactly the same way. The genius of Hannibal is that he takes all these disparate elements and gets them to work in combination.
Utilizing their different skills, he united them into a formidable fighting force, far deadlier than merely the sum of their parts. The bulk of Hannibal's army was made up of Spanish soldiers who formed the core of his infantry. Famed as warriors using a curved sword, the falcata. In addition to his troops from Spain, he had various specialists. Slingers from the Balearic Islands. From today's perspective, using a sling as a weapon might seem a bit primitive, but they were formidable. They more than matched any contemporary archer. Legend has it that the Balearic slingers were paid in women rather than gold or silver. And then there were the Numidian cavalry from North Africa. They were incredibly maneuverable. They would charge the enemy, shower them with javelins, then flee, only to rally and repeat the attack.
These blokes don't ride with a saddle, they don't ride with a bridle, they don't wear any armor, they're very fast, ride small, agile little ponies, and they're natural horsemen. They've been riding since they were small boys.
On the battlefield, there was no cavalry that even came close to matching them. With his fast and flexible army, Hannibal was a formidable opponent by any standard. But he had another ace up his sleeve, a weapon designed to strike fear and terror. Almost as famous as Hannibal himself are the elephants he used in battle. These were the Carthaginians' terror weapon. Small numbers of elephants could have a massive effect. It's not hard to imagine why. The sight of charging elephants would strike fear into any right-thinking person facing them.
Elephants are mainly terror weapons. They scare the living daylights out of the enemy, make them run away. They're big, they're grey, they make strange noises, they're smelly, they frighten people. There's something that no one's ever seen before, particularly for a Roman. You've never seen an animal that's that sort of size, and you certainly haven't seen one bearing down on you in great numbers. So all it has to do is turn up and come charging towards you, and you're already pretty scared.
You cannot imagine how fast an elephant can be if he goes wild. The most people, they think an elephant is very slow and because he's so big. He's like 40, 45 kilometers per hour. He can move very, very fast. So I think it's a very effective weapon in the war.
The elephants used by the Carthaginians were a smaller, now extinct breed of African elephant from the foothills of North Africa's Atlas Mountains. The deployment of the battle elephant wasn't particularly subtle. Immediately before the battle, the elephants were first plied with wine.
I can imagine he used some alcohol because elephants, they like alcohol, like beer or wine or something like this. They will drink it. And it's like, the effect is like for people, some people are very shy. So they drink some alcohol and they're the biggest fighter in the world. And this isn't with an elephant. You can turn the character with alcohol.
The elephants would then be prodded in their ankles. In their inebriated state, this would have made them as mad as hell. Then it was simply a matter of pointing them at the enemy and charging, and hanging on.
The elephant is very big and very large, and it's just going to trample its way through any formation. So they're very formidable. They can break up particularly dense bodies of troops, and cavalry are just frightened by terrifying the horses.
Hardly a weapon of surgical precision, the idea was that they would batter the enemy, breaking their lines.
When an elephant attacks people, he will use his whole body. So, first of all, they will roll the trunk in. They get down with the head, and they attack with the trunk and hit very hard. If they have tusk and use the tusk, you will maybe already be dead by a hit from a tusk. And the feet, they go on and smash everything under the feet. They go like tomato juice.
However, there was a fundamental flaw to this weapon system. They were inherently unpredictable.
The problem is that they're temperamental creatures. They really don't naturally do this sort of thing, and they don't want to be in a noisy, colourful, swirling battle.
By and large, if you have a 5-ton fighting machine, it is better if it isn't temperamental, drunk, and knows who its enemies are. Since running amok is something an elephant can also do very well.
He don't know the difference between Roman people and Carthaginians. They only learn to attack people. And it don't matter what, black, white, yellow, green, they go and attack everything.
As a last resort, the elephant driver was issued with a spike and hammer to drive into the elephant's skull to kill it.
The problem with this is that very often the reason why the elephant's panicked is because its driver's been killed in the first place, and even if he's still alive, he's probably hanging on for dear life just to stay up there and not thinking of anything clever like that.
But even with a terror weapon and a flexible fighting force, they're of little use without the skill to deploy them effectively. As a battlefield commander, Hannibal still ranks as one of the world's elite.
Hannibal's military legacy is really one based upon tactical genius, tactical skill. It's particularly at the battlefield level that he tends to be most admired.
In both of his first battles in Italy, he managed to defeat the Roman army despite being hugely outnumbered, simply by using the element of surprise.
Hannibal has the knack of doing the unexpected. He always is several steps ahead of his opponent in terms of thinking and what he does. He can set them up in ambush positions. He chooses where the battle will be fought. The Romans dance to his tune. He makes them do exactly what he wants.
At the battles of Trebia in December 218 BC and then the following year at Lake Trasimene, Hannibal ambushed the numerically superior Roman army, well and truly crushing them each time. But Hannibal's ultimate lesson in tactics would come in 216 BC at the Battle of Cannae. Having had their noses bloodied twice already, the Roman army was determined not to make the same mistake a third time. This time they really meant business and dispatched an army of some 80,000 to deal with Hannibal, they hoped, for the last time. It was the largest army Rome had ever marshaled, outnumbering Hannibal's forces by something like 2 to 1.
The Battle of Cannae is Hannibal's greatest challenge. He can see the Roman army is bigger than his. They've got twice as many heavy infantrymen as he's got. Hannibal's got to find a way of defusing that power somehow, and of using the Romans' strength and their power against them.
And to ensure that there could be no ambush this time, at Cannae, the Romans met Hannibal on an open plain.
You have to imagine about 100, 150,000 men stretched out in the field over there. They're stretching from the river for about 4 kilometers out in that direction. Every single one of them's terrified. Their hearts are beating, butterflies in their stomachs. Some of them feel physically sick. They're wondering who's going to be alive at the end of the day.
The Roman army masses in a large formation. Their plan is simply to use their massive numerical advantage to steamroller through Hannibal's army. Hannibal stretches his men into a single thin line to face the Roman onslaught.
Then, just to show the Romans he's not frightened of them, he actually advances the center of that line to put his men, when they start the battle, nearer to the Romans than they needed to be.
Hidden behind this line, on either side, are his best heavy infantry, the Libyans.
The most disciplined troops in Hannibal's army are the Libyan infantrymen raised from North Africa. These are very well trained and they're very heavily equipped. And these people can go head to head against Roman legionaries and stand a good chance of winning.
Hannibal then sends his cavalry on each flank to fight their opposite numbers on the Roman side.
All he emphasizes to his cavalry officers is that they've got to win quickly. Time is the critical thing at the Battle of Cannae. Hannibal's plan relies upon each thing happening in sequence, and if one fails, the whole thing would unravel.
The Roman juggernaut then meets the thin line of Hannibal's troops, and after fierce fighting, Hannibal's line begins to give in the center.
The Romans are successful at first. They push back the Celtic and Spanish infantry, forcing the crescent to turn inside out. Now, they think they're winning. That's exactly what Hannibal wants them to think.
At this stage, the Roman armies send more and more men into the center to keep pressing their advantage. As the fighting line is pushed back, the Romans find themselves with Hannibal's Libyans on either flank. Now Hannibal gets these, his best infantry, to wheel round and attack the Roman army from both sides. The Roman army has been drawn into a trap. Finally, Hannibal's cavalry, having defeated the Romans, regroup and attack from behind. The Roman army has been completely surrounded.
Tactically, the Roman army hasn't got a hope. Maybe some 50,000 men are surrounded in one dense mass. They can't fight effectively, they're trapped. But then Hannibal's army has to kill them, and that's when the grim part of Cannae begins.
What followed was a massacre. Rome's army was to all intents and purposes annihilated. But what makes this particularly terrifying is this isn't mechanized fighting. This is all done hand to hand.
Most close combat at Cannae is fought using this kind of weapon, a short sword, which can be used not just for slashing at an enemy, but also for stabbing. You can hunch in against an enemy and stab at them with the sword. You're not restricted by having men close to you.